the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week. And welcome back, folks. Welcome back to Business Story of the Week. I am your host, Joshua, and today's question is: have you ever thought about, what insights does a best-selling author gain from traveling over 40 countries and experiencing diverse perspectives, right? I myself am quite curious about that. I hope you, audience and listeners out there, are as curious as I am, because our guest today is Eric Wilson, a New York Times bestselling author whose works span from mysteries to memoirs. It's a diverse, ladies and gentlemen. His 21st book, Confessions of a Former Prosecutor, tells the true story of a prosecutor's shaken faith in the justice system. Eric has traveled over 40 countries, drawing from diverse experiences to fuel his writing. Married for nearly 34 years, he and his wife Carolyn share a creative household with their two daughters and two grandchildren. Eric's message emphasizes the importance of connecting with people from different backgrounds to build resilience and understanding. And today, he's going to share that unique perspective, that diverse perspective with us, and that experiences he has had all over the world. Eric, thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I wish I could come visit you where you are
Fantastic.
instead of
Eric,
having to sit in my office at home.
well, yeah, I can tell right away that there's a travel bug in you. You know, that's something a traveler would say, and you were like, I would rather do this in person than online. I'd be rather be there and travel. I have an excuse to go there at least, right? But Eric,
Yeah.
here we are. Thank you for joining us. We need to talk about that traveling experience of yours and all that writing experience that you have done. But before we get there, before we really get right into the grit of it, tell us about your early years. In fact, tell us about, go way back to your origin stories. I love starting the show like this. Have you always known as a child that you were going to be an author? Have you always known you were going to be traveling the world, right? Like, did you always want to be, going all the way? What is the story of Eric Wilson?
Yeah. My parents were 16 years old when I was conceived, and they were from Catholic
Hmm.
families, and they were disowned by their family when they ran off together to get married and without permission. And
Okay.
so I didn't end up meeting my own grandfather till I was 20 years old. And that was a pretty,
Wow.
a pretty informative part of my life, because my parents ended up having to find family and connections in other places, and learn to reach out
Hmm.
beyond their own uh, immediate family. They had some strong immediate family that supported them as well,
Hmm.
but there were those losses of relationship early on. And so what ended up happening is we moved from San Francisco and Oakland, California area, and ended up traveling over to Europe
Hmm.
in the 1970s. And this is the middle of the hippie movement, free love. A lot of things were changing, a lot of distrust in the
Hmm.
American system, a lot of similar things that are happening now, 50
Hmm.
years later. So my parents, in the middle of all that,
Hmm.
decided to travel overseas. And that took my brother and sister and I as little children. Some of basically our first memories really were living over
Hmm.
in Europe, and then eventually we migrated across Asia and lived in India for the last year before we returned to America.
Hmm.
So America was the strange country to us. We
Hmm.
were told this is your home, but when we came back to America, it didn't feel like our home. We didn't know what the rules were and how things worked here.
Mhm.
I'd learned in India to barter at a store,
Mhm.
well, with people on the street usually, but so I'd walk into a store in America and try to barter and tell them, I'm not going
Interesting.
to pay that price, forget it.
Mhm.
And I'd walk out the door and think they're going to chase after me and change the price, but they wouldn't. And, just there was this disconnect as a little kid of trying to figure out where do I belong and what world is
Hilarious.
mine and what are the rules.
Mhm.
But I think what that
Mhm.
did, and
Mhm.
as to your
Mhm.
question about the writing, it really informed my writing because I realized there's just so many different ways to look at the world. And as children, we had to not judge people by the clothes they were wearing, by their color, by their language. We had to learn to
Mhm.
be judges of character and really
Mhm.
know a person individually, whether they were someone we could trust or not, whether they were someone we could be a friend with or not, based on nothing except a relationship, not the external things that we tend to focus on oftentimes. So, coming back to America, I felt like everybody looked, the majority of people looked like me, but I didn't feel like I belonged here. I felt more comfortable in India where the women were pinching my cheeks
Mhm.
and pulling my hair, thinking I was a ghost and wondering if I was real. That was the world I knew. So that felt more normal to me.
Interesting.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, that
Mhm.
really, changed the way I
But
approached
but that
storytelling.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it gave you such quite the what you call this an alien perspective, and so early on in your life too, as a child, being fresh from the world and looking at the world from a really new perspective and almost unfettered, so to speak. Like it's
Hmm.
just you don't know yet what to experience of it, and now you've taken all these diversities and all that, and it must have shaped so much of your perspective and who you are personally. But at the same time, you're talking about this in a way that yes, the good thing that early on you had the world as your oyster, right? But at the same time, early on, maybe too early on, you struggled finding your place in the world, right? So
Hmm.
there's like a pro and con to it, but
Yeah.
it's clear that it fueled your writing, it fueled your creativity. Was it because that you traveled around so early that you felt like you needed to move around a lot? Have you found that home now, would you say, of staying or sticking somewhere, but that bug still remained in you, that you still moved a lot? Because, yes, it fueled your creativity, but at the same time, you were still finding a place to belong to. How is
Hmm.
that for you right now, Eric?
So I think what happened is our sense of belonging, and I will speak for myself, though I think this is true for my sister and brother as well. We
Mhm.
wrote a memoir actually called American Leftovers because we felt like leftovers when we came back to America. And
Mhm.
my mom also was very fond of
Mhm.
cooking from leftovers because we normally were traveling on a shoestring budget. And then eventually my parents' marriage broke up, and so
Mhm.
then again we felt like leftovers. So that book really covers some of these ideas
Mhm.
that we faced as children. And yes, there was a negative of having traveled and having lost connection and not knowing where we fit in. And I think all three of us to this day have those feelings at times where we know how to fit into any
Mhm.
situation and be comfortable. I could walk up to a gang of Hills Angels bikers, and I feel like I can connect with them very quickly and feel at home. But I also know I don't
Mhm.
really belong there. That's not my world, and I feel that way all around the world. I can usually walk up to any group of people and figure out a way to connect and find a connection between us.
Mhm.
But there's also that sense that do I really belong in any of these places? So for to answer the question of finding that home, I think what we found was that our family was the home, and wherever we went, home was with us. So when that family broke up, that was an
Wow.
extra hard element because now we had no home to go back to physically
Wow.
or relationally.
Mhm.
So I'd say my wife and I
Mhm.
and my kids really created our own home and family, and physically ended up moving around quite a bit with a lot of that searching going on
Mhm.
early on because my wife was raised in a nomadic lifestyle as
Mhm.
well. But we settled in Nashville, Tennessee
Mhm.
23 years ago, and we believe this will be our home base
Wow.
probably for a long time. We have, we still travel a lot, but we
Mhm.
always come back to Nashville. And when we drive
Mhm.
into town, we both will get
Mhm.
teary eyed and like, oh, we just love this is our home. It has become our home. And part of it is because it's a very open, creative city.
Wow.
It's called Music City, just
Yes.
and despite being in a part of America
Mhm.
that's considered
Yes.
very conservative, it's a pretty progressive city and
Mhm.
comparatively. And
Mhm.
there's just a lot of creativity and openness and
Mhm.
like-minded people. And
Mhm.
late at night, I can call somebody in Nashville, and they'll still be up, or I'll text them, and they'll still be up at midnight or 1 in the morning because there's just a lot of creative people up late doing things. And back where I grew up in Oregon, if it was past 9 o'clock, they're probably not going to answer me. They're probably in bed already. So, it's just
Mhm.
even those little things where you feel like I've
Mhm.
found my
Mhm.
people and, I like this, but I feel comfortable, honestly, anywhere in the world. I really just love the world and love people and love new experiences and hearing new perspectives.
I love that, Eric. I mean, it's a beautiful story that you're telling as well. I can feel the love for the home that you have built, the home that you have found, and I feel that I'm happy, of course, that you found this. Because you said you struggled with it as well, and it does feel like you struggled with it early on, but now you found it. It feels great. It feels, you know, uh, I feel really happy for you, Eric. Uh, Having lived in over 40 countries or having traveled in over 40 different locations, I really want to get into the perspectives that you gained. How have
Mm-hmm.
your international experiences specifically influenced your writing when it comes, especially on your specific style of storytelling? Here's the thing for our
Mm-hmm.
audience and listeners, first of all, Eric, when it comes to mysteries, to memoirs, it's it doesn't really do you justice because you've written some horror as well. You've written some as fantasy as well, and it's a lot. It's a diverse genre of written books that you have done. So I don't think mysteries to memoirs really does it justice. There's so much you have written out there, and you said right before our interview as well. You said like people don't know exactly what I'm writing when they mention Eric Wilson because you've written so much, you know? But
Yeah.
I think that is because of your diverse experience. Talk to us about how being everywhere influenced your storytelling.
Yeah. Well, I think it's influenced my storytelling and the way I approach relationships because having traveled, I lived in Amsterdam, for example, and I took my wife there years later to show her Amsterdam and this city that I fell in love with. And we're walking down the street and sitting at an outdoor cafe in the middle of Amsterdam, we ran into somebody we knew that we hadn't seen in years. And that kind of thing happens all around the world in places I've been where I'll run into people I know or we'll find a connection from through another friend. And so what it's done is it's shown me that the world is a small place. We if we can get past our differences, we realize we all have a lot of similar desires and goals and needs, and we all want to find our place. We all
Mhm.
want to succeed in whatever dreams we have. We want to be accepted by our families and raise families that we're proud of, or be in a relationship that we're satisfied and comfortable with, or we all have certain things that we desire. And so in my storytelling, I think I love to find characters that make me think of questions that I wrestle with. I don't like to write a story with an answer in mind. I like to write a story with questions in mind. What am I wrestling with in today's world? What questions do I have? How do I listen to people my age especially complain about the younger generation or the way of the world today, and I listen to it and I think back myself. A lot of it is about memory, going, when I was younger, hearing old people complain about my generation or about the world, all it did is make me think they're bitter old people. It didn't make me respect them or want to hear what they had to say. It made me
Mhm,
just think,
mhm,
how sad. I don't want to become
mhm,
that person.
mhm.
And I started realizing I was becoming that person about a year or two ago. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. So in my writing, my idea
Yeah.
is not to point my finger and give you answers or tell you how you're doing it wrong or how we could do it better. My thing is to find out how we can
Wow.
connect
Wow.
and find the similarities we have and learn how to respect those in each other and realize that we're all
Hmm.
usually trying to get to the same place just in different ways. So, if I work with a
Absolutely.
Gen Zer on a project, for example, yes, maybe they don't have the same dedication to a deadline that I grew up with, but they have a dedication to creativity and open mindedness that's different than what I grew up with. So we can both bring
Yes.
something different to the
Yeah.
table. So I love that, and that informs my
Absolutely.
writing and the
Absolutely.
characters I write about. And yeah, I hope that answers the question.
And that's very interesting too, because again, well, no, I love it. I love it because the experiences you've had are diverse, right? And we all grow up differently. The cultures you've had, you've also experienced them in such a diverse manner that we treat, cultures treat each other differently. They raise children differently. They interact with things differently. They have, norms that are just not that are just completely alien to each, culture. So I imagine this gave you such a rich perspective in thinking like I can't, I don't want to be the one to be telling you just like, like a one track mind kind of perspective, right? It doesn't do
Mhm.
justice to the diverse experience that you've had. Instead, you use this rich experience to tell everyone else like the world is your oyster and the world is so much more diverse, right? Because having to share this experience, I think, is a blessing, and I think it really shines with the creativity and the diverseness of the books that you have written. You and your wife Carolyn, saying there in Nashville, you lead creative lives under one roof. um how would you, this is more personal and I'm very interested about this one. How do you balance your writing career with your family life and of course your wife's musical pursuits as well? And how have your daughters picked up the creativity bone as well, or the creativity juices? Talk to us a bit about your life, Eric, your family life.
Well, I'd say the biggest thing my daughters have picked up is watching us be willing to take risks and move, whether it's physically,
Wow.
we've moved locations geographically, but also even the changes we've been willing to make in our mindsets. So, someone listening to this might think, oh, Eric grew up in all
Hmm.
these different countries. So it's easy for him to embrace the differences of generations or cultures. But that's not always true. There's people I'm sure in my life who could tell you mistakes I've made in those areas. And I've really spent the last,
Right.
well, my whole life in certain ways, but really the last 10 to 15 years, I've really wanted to open myself up to understanding different racial perspectives or different gender perspectives, different generational perspectives, and ask questions again instead of giving answers. A friend of mine actually said to me, "You're so opinionated," and he said this to me about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and it really stopped me in my tracks. I thought, I don't think of myself that way, but if I'm coming across to you that way, then maybe I'm too busy telling you and not listening. And so I really started changing the way I approached things to try to ask questions and listen more than talk.
Okay.
And realized, yeah, maybe I've been
Hmm.
egotistical and thought I had the answers. I've experienced all this stuff and I have some wise words to give you. And I thought, no, everybody has wisdom to bring to the table. So let me learn to listen a little more. So, in other words, we can all change.
Hmm.
And that's, I think, probably the biggest thing we've shown to our daughters in our creative pursuits and in our relational pursuits is that whether it's moving geographically to pursue a dream, whether it's calling someone up to say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I think maybe we've had a misunderstanding. Let's try to work this out because I value our relationship." It's much easier. None of us like those confrontations or those tough conversations. It's easier to just avoid it and 10 years later you have a chasm between you that may never be filled again. And so my wife and I really try to build bridges. That's kind of a theme in our life, is building bridges. And so that works in the artistic realm as well. My wife has been very instrumental in me getting even published the first time, because I was a perfectionist and thought, if it's not perfect, why even send it to a
Wow.
publisher? And she's very much a live in the moment, who cares what anybody thinks kind of person. So she really would challenge me, and I'd
Mhm.
watch her freedom and her joy and her, she could go sing karaoke and even mess up the words to a song, and she'd come back and say, these three people told me I did great, and she'd just embrace it and have fun with it. And if I made those mistakes, I would never want to do it again. So she helped me learn some freedom and to, embrace the mistakes and the fun and the human side of creativity and just flow with it. And that's where the best stuff comes from anyway. So
Well, well, it's a beautiful balance. It's a beautiful team that you have with each other. Of course, it's like, the perfectionist on the other side, and the one it's like, just go do it, just pursue it, just go get it. It's just it's of course, a much needed balance. Of course, it's like a supportive kind of symbiotic way of doing. Especially you talk about being opinionated, because I think it's only natural to feel like, uh, or at least come off as that, because of all the experiences you've had. But the awareness, the self awareness you have, also is quite a great trait and personality you have to grow, not just as a writer, as an author, but also as a family man, as a person. And I can't imagine. I can only imagine how much of this reflects in your writing in your book. I was thinking about talking about your latest book, which is Confessions of a Former Prosecutor. It delves into, like someone who got, whose views were thrown off with the justice system. I wanted to ask what drew you to this story, but in another sense as well, I feel like it doesn't do you justice just talking about this particular book, right? Talk to us about the diversity of the books you've written. Introduce us, of course, to your latest book, but also introduce us to the upcoming projects that are coming up for you. So, talk to us a bit
okay.
more about your authorship, your library, basically.
Yeah, Confessions of a Former Prosecutor was actually brought to me. Somebody said, hey, we have this story we want to write. This man used to be an assistant attorney general in Tennessee, and would you be interested in writing his
Mhm.
story? And at first I thought, I know nothing about the legal system. I don't know even the terminology to try to write from a legal perspective.
Mhm.
My first inclination was to say, no, I'm not the right
Mhm.
person. But this is one of the other things I've been trying to learn in the last 5 to 6 years, is to approach life with gratitude and to say yes to opportunities. And because I caught myself saying no to things, or saying, oh, I could never do that, or that's not my talent. And I thought, well, with the right people around you, you can
Mhm.
learn and you can grow, and don't live in fear of making mistakes. Be willing to not be a perfectionist.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
thought, I said yes,
Mhm.
and went
Mhm.
ahead and met with this man, and we spent 3 days at a hotel just doing interviews all day long. So probably 30 to 40 hours of interviews over 3 days. And I wrote down a lot of notes and ended up working with him on a story, because I loved his perspective on the justice system, how his own
Uh-huh.
faith, the way he grew up
Uh-huh.
with his religious ideology, how that had been challenged by even his one specific murder case that he handled, and then how it also forced him to face his own
Mhm.
racial. He himself would tell you he's a racist, like a recovering racist. He grew up with a lot more racism than he realized he had.
Mhm.
He did not think he was, but he realized how much that was underneath the surface in his thinking. So all those things drew me to it for the reasons we've already talked about. I loved that, seeing life through a different perspective, being willing to learn and grow. And
Mhm.
he had so much wisdom. I felt like I could learn so much just from listening to this guy talk about all those perspectives. And so it was really an honor to even work in this story with him. And as I looked through the book again after it was all done, and he had done his edits because it was his story, and he had to make sure it was in his voice, that his voice came through. I was again really proud of it. I felt like this is very fast paced and gripping, but it really challenges our thinking.
Wow.
So that probably
Wow.
underlines some points of all my books that I really enjoy. I love to have characters that are counterculture, or cause you to see things through a different set of eyes than maybe you would normally approach a situation with. And the book that came before that had to do with a man during the Korean War, an American who went to Korea during the Korean War, and ended up seeing all the refugees and the children living in the streets. And he decided he had to do something. He couldn't just ignore it. And he wasn't a man with a lot of money, but he came home to America and started raising money, not to bring Koreans to America and turn them into good little Americans, but to help the Koreans who were sacrificially already doing so much for these children, but they were struggling themselves because they were in the middle of a war-torn country. And a lot of that damage to the country was done by American forces
Wow.
and American decisions that these Koreans had no choice. They were kind of caught in Cold War decisions that U.S. and
Wow.
Russian and Chinese governments were making. So I really was drawn to that
Yep.
story as well. And I loved that this American
Mhm.
man did not see himself as the white savior, but he just saw himself as somebody who had to do what he could to empower others to help their own country. And today, that
Mhm.
what he started
Mhm.
is now helps children all over the world. There's 2 million children now served by that organization he started, even though he died over 50 years ago. So, it's just a very inspiring story.
Wow.
And the biggest challenge was getting the Korean stories
Mhm.
from the Korean War era, because the younger generation doesn't know a lot about that era, and
There you
the
go.
older generation doesn't want to talk
Mhm.
about it because there's a lot of shame,
Mhm.
a lot of
Mhm. Mhm.
things that were tough for them, and they don't really want to talk about it. So that was our biggest challenge, and it was during COVID that we were writing this book. So we had to figure out how to, during COVID, get to older Koreans who were involved in this story and hear their story. So that was something I'm very proud of, that we were able to get them to share their stories, even agree to use their real names. And we definitely included those in this book to make sure that the Koreans' perspective came through. So again, I just love those international flavors that we can all taste from, and see the good and bad that's happened all around the world, and we can all learn from each other.
I mean, of course, I want to point out as well, real quick, that it's great timing as well. I mean, with the Korean trend coming out, and it's a great audience to tap into. It's a great culture and perspective to tap into as well. It's
Yeah.
very relevant in the case of again, it's new, it's now, and it's here, and you are sharing that perspective again, not just for us around the world, but also for them who aren't educated on this as well. And I love the enthusiasm of you drawing from real life perspectives, from true
Mhm.
stories, and like you said, international flavors are, it really shines through. I mean, the way you talk about it, the enthusiasm truly, truly shines through. Eric, I mean, we can go on an entire day about all your books and about all the perspective that you've written about and you're going to write about, but certainly there is a lot more that you can push out and offer there and punch out. And there's a lot more creativity surrounding that. Perhaps you can visit the Philippines once again and maybe be inspired and write something about the Philippines. Just- but Eric,
We can work on a book together.
as much as I yeah, why not? Why not? Why not? Let's do that together. Eric, I've always wanted to be a co-author. Why not? Let's do that, right? I'd love to give you this opportunity now, Eric. Where can we find you? Where can we, learn more about your books, learn more about Eric Wilson? Where we can we grab copies of your book? And where can we connect with you? Where can we find Eric Wilson?
Yeah. Well, my website is wilsonwriter.com, WILSONWRITER. There are a number of other Eric Wilsons who are writers, including a journalist with the New York Times and a Canadian children mystery author. So Wilson Writer is my website, and
Oh,
that's where
wow.
you'll find my information. Of course, any online retailers have my
Mhm.
books, and hopefully physical bookstores as well. And I always love to see reviews posted, whether it's on a reading site or a retail site, because reviews, as a writer, we write. I spend about 1,000 hours per book between writing, editing, and research. And at the end of the day, if you
Wow.
see
Wow.
100 or 200 reviews, you're like, really, that's all the people who read that after all the time I put into it? And obviously there's a lot more people, but it's great to have feedback and pass that on to others if you like a book. But I really hope that what comes through is for anybody, whatever business you're in, whatever stage of life you're in, we can all learn from each other. Whether you're younger and you have someone older that's got a little bit of that bitter, let me tell you attitude, a lot of times people are, if you give them a little bit of respect, and this goes both ways, they will soften and be
Yeah.
willing to listen to you if you give them that respect.
Mhm.
And I can say that to older people too, the people like me who can get bitter and old, like, show some respect to
Yes.
people that are any age around you, younger, and maybe they'll actually be willing to listen to you too. So, I think it's a really important business principle: build bridges, don't burn them. If you need to retreat, there's nothing wrong with retreating sometimes to gather your forces. And it's hard to retreat if you've burned a bridge behind you. I'm a chess player. I like playing chess, and sometimes you have to move a piece back to put it in a better position for the next
Mhm.
stage of the game. And so, don't be afraid to retreat and go. It's time to regroup and relearn and ask some new questions, and it can lead to better stories in your business and in your personal life.
Eric, I love it. I love the perspective. I love the, just the humility around it as well. It feels very, it feels relaxing. I feel the relaxed demeanor about you, and just the acceptance of it all and the awareness of it all. It all truly shines through. And, I keep this with me you know, for most for all the time, like hopefully it inspires our audience and listeners as well, the same way as it inspired me. Eric, I want to grab a copy of your book right now. It's just been great. I invite our audience and listeners as well to do the same. I love that bit of wisdom that you left us with there, right there. Be respectful, just be kind. It's something that we need more of in the world today. Eric, thank you for coming on the show. For our audience and listeners, make sure you check out wilsonwriter.com. Grab a copy of any of Eric's books. Reach out to him. And Eric, yeah, thank you again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
To all our audience and listeners out there, see you on the next one.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.